Hey everyone, Mr. Gray 3IS here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of air suspension. In my last video, I installed my air suspension, and I've had it on for about a month and a half to 2 months now, and so that's given me a pretty good chance to figure out the pros and cons to them. And I did have some existing pros in my head when getting the suspension, as you would when buying something. And I have figured out some slight cons along the way, but really nothing too crazy. So that's what I'm going to discuss in today's video. Since my last video, I have messed with the front fitment a little bit. Where we last left off, I had 15mm in the rear and 0mm spacers in the front, so no spacers. And since then, I have put 15mm spacers back in the front, so now I have 15mm all around. It's much more noticeable when you look at it from the back. You can see that there's little to no gap in the front up there. It meets right with that fender. So if you remember last video, I was hitting my bumper tabs with 15mm spacers. So I did have to trim some parts in there a little bit, nothing vital. It still holds exactly like it would if I didn't trim it, but now I have 15mm all around. So that is the only thing that really has changed since last video. Anyways, let's get into those pros and cons. So why would someone want to get air suspension? What's the purpose of it? First off, it is great for daily driving. It is super comfortable. I think it is a little more comfortable than OEM suspension, much more comfortable than lowering springs, which I was on before, RSR Super Downs, and it is a dream to daily drive. What is the purpose of air suspension? Well, in my case, my car is kind of my show car, and it's my daily driver. So it allows me to give it this show car stance and have the lowered car look while driving, but still gives me the ability to raise it and lower it according to what I need. Since I'm dailying this car, there are a lot of driveways and speed bumps that I come across on the daily basis. So being able to raise it is super helpful. And on the opposite end, being able to lower it like it is now, right to the ground, is another great thing about air suspension. In the introduction clip, you saw me rolling in and then airing out. That height that I rolled in at is my ride height. It is just about what I was at with RSR Super Downs. It has a nice track stance to it. It's not really tucking too much, but the rear and the front has just a little bit of tire in the fender, and I think it looks great like that. So another pro, speaking of adjustable ride height, is adjustable dampening. While some of you guys might be like, Mr. Gray 3IS, I have this already on my coilovers. Well, a lot of us don't have coilovers or just have stock suspension. So one thing about bags, just like coilover suspension, is it has adjustable dampening. So that means you can adjust how hard or soft the ride quality is, and adjusting that in combination with the height of your bag is kind of like adjusting your spring stiffness and the dampening at the same time. So coming from stock suspension to lowering springs to these bags and being able to dampen them in general is a big pro, and I love it so much. These Airlift shocks specifically have 30-way adjustable dampening. So that means in the front and rear, I can adjust them 30 ways. How I have them set right now is right in the middle between soft and hard. Pretty much 15 clicks from all the way to soft. And that for me is pretty good. I'd say if you want to drive lower than what I was rolling in at on the first clip, you'd probably definitely have to make them a little bit stiffer so your suspension doesn't move up and down as much and you wouldn't rub your tires on your wheel wells. And that's just one of the many cool things about bags, is you can adjust every little thing like that. So if you want to drive really slammed, some people even drive almost at this height, you can crank that dampening all the way to stiff and your suspension will hardly move. Sure, it'll feel like you're on washers, but you can drive super low, and that's just one of the cool things about bags. We just did a pro, so let's move on to a con. The first con that many people think of right as they think of bags is the price. Bags are expensive, and they're going to be one of the most expensive ways of lowering your car. That is because there is a lot that goes into it. Unlike coilovers, bags have way more than just the shock and spring component to them. Bags have a tank, air lines, compressor or compressors, a whole manifold that controls the flow of air and where it goes, a remote, wiring, fuses. It's just pretty much an entire kit on top of what coilovers would be. So because of that, bags are a little expensive, but in my case, I think they are super worth it for daily driving a show-esque car like my own. In the last video, I showed you guys my trunk setup, and it was a little bit different than this. I have pardon this little trunk organizer. I have my little tire inflator and jump pack in there. But this setup right here was almost all the way at the front, and I had yet to really organize it. But here's a little glimpse of what it looks like now. Pretty organized, pretty simple. I have 2 compressors, a manifold, and my 4-gallon tank back there. And this is what I'm talking about. You would have this on top of all your struts. So that's why this is a little bit pricey. This alone is about, I'd say about $2,000. So that on top of the actual bags, you can see why it's a little bit more pricey than lowering springs or coilovers. Now, while we're on the topic of the tank and the compressor and the manifold and all that, let me go ahead and throw this one other con out there: air leaks. While air leaks aren't as common as one might think when thinking of bags, they are possible. Usually when you first install your bags, you'll come across an air leak. Maybe it's an airline that's cut kind of at an angle, or it's an airline that you accidentally scratched a little bit when putting in, or you maybe just didn't push one in all the way. I would have been super surprised if I didn't have an air leak when I first installed my bags, and lo and behold, I did. I just didn't cut the tip of my airline at a completely straight angle when pushing it into my right rear bag, and it gave me the slightest air leak where I'd lose a couple PSI every night. But all I had to do was hop under there, remove it, snip it a little bit more straight, plug it back in, and I haven't had an issue since. And once you have everything set up like it should be, like I have now, and no air leaks, it's really hard to develop an air leak unless you like mess up an airline of some sort while driving. But since mine are run all throughout the cabin and not under the car, it is really hard to mess up one. So air leaks is a con, but it's not as common as you might think. Now, another pro is precise fitment. It applies to me a little bit, but more to people that have wheels built to have great fitment. But my wheels are the stock wheels with some spacers, and the fitment is pretty good. As you can tell right here, it is right about almost touching right there. And same with the front. The front is pretty much touching my inner fender liner and almost touching some components of my bumper and fender liner. That would not be possible with coilovers or lowering springs. While you could achieve that, it just wouldn't make sense. If you're already almost touching parts of your car with your wheel, you would literally have to have zero movement, or it would just break your car as soon as you start driving. So with air suspension, being able to park at shows or just in a parking lot and air out to that perfect fitment, that's just one of the many benefits of air suspension. When I say precise fitment, you can sit here and tap your controller 1 PSI by 1 PSI and it'll go lower, lower, little by little, and you can get that exact fitment you're looking for. Whether that's airing completely out, like me, or maybe still keeping air in your bags, but just enough to where your fender barely touches your lip. When you see those people have that fender to the lip look that's super tight, that's how you do it. Now, like any computer or electronic, it can malfunction. Air suspension, not so much, but the computer that controls it, yes. It's pretty much a little iPod. As you can see, I have mine mounted right here. It's this little iPod, and sometimes it just doesn't act exactly like you'd want it to. And that's not always the cause of the electronics itself, but sometimes the manifold just needs recalibrating. There was a point with my air suspension where when I would air out to a certain height, it would actually air past it and then kind of push a little bit of air at a time back into the bags to get me right at the height I wanted. While that's okay for me, because if I air out all the way, it doesn't do too much, but for others, that could ruin their fender or ruin their wheels, or it could be deadly. So in that case, all you need to do is recalibrate your manifold, which just takes a minute. But that just shows these systems aren't flawless, but they are pretty good. And with normal computers or your phone, you update them almost every month or two. So to only have to calibrate a manifold once or twice during the ownership of bags, that's pretty good. But it is still a con in my books. Now, like I kind of talked about before, being able to raise your car to get over speed bumps or driveways is a huge pro. And I have had the same front lip on my car since I've installed these bags. And if you know me and you know my car before, I was going through a front lip every couple months or so. I would go through a good amount a year. But since I've had this, I have had no issues with scraping or busting my front lip on speed bumps and driveways. I was able to raise the car up, go into the driveway almost like a normal car, not even at an angle, and then air back out to my ride height. And speaking of speed bumps, I can now go over them. I still mostly go around every speed bump that I can, and I used to go around every speed bump that I can, but there are some times where there's just not a spot to go around them. So being able to air up and drive over them like a normal person is kind of nice sometimes, and that is one of the pros of air suspension. Now, this is kind of a pro and con, and I talked about it just a little bit earlier, but that trunk setup, that's kind of cool if it's organized pretty well, and you can see some crazy trunk setups. Like I've seen one with the whole Lego set in there, or you guys know the one with the koi pond in there. That's pretty cool. While it is awesome for shows, which is a pro, and it gets a lot of attention, there is a big con attached to it. You have no trunk space. So in my setup, I tried to give myself that little half trunk where it opens up. I tried to give myself that as trunk space. But in some situations where you want to have a really cool and intricate trunk setup, you just can't have trunk space anymore. And that means your back seats are going to become your trunk. For a show car, that's not a big deal because you don't fill your trunk with that much anyways. But for a daily driver like my car, that is definitely something you need to consider when thinking of a trunk setup and how you want to organize your bags. Now, like everything, there's pros and cons to it. I touched up on some of the ones that have affected me the most, but I'd say for the cons compared to the pros, it's pretty worth it. Like I said in my airbag install video, it's a little pricey, but it's pretty worth it. And I have yet to have any major issues. I've driven the car multiple times every day since I've had the bags, and they have been great. I get compliments everywhere I go. People stare at it like I'm crazy when I air out. It's cool. It is really cool. And I do totally recommend it. Now, I'm sure I missed some pros and some cons, but like I said, I mentioned the ones that apply to me the most. So if you guys have any questions or comments or concerns, please leave them in the comments below. I will be sure to answer them ASAP. I'm really good at answering comments. I'm also great at answering Instagram DMs. So please follow me on Instagram at gray_3is. I post on there every few days. I do some cool videos, some cool shoots, and I really showcase how these bags can change the look of this car. Man, I'm sorry to go off track, but I'm really digging how this sun is shining on that carbon fiber. Oh my gosh. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know I haven't posted for a little bit, but I'm back and I'm hoping to post a little more frequently than I have been. Shout out to, well, you know who you are. He reached out to me on Instagram and he said, Mr. Gray, you know what'd be cool? You should do a pros and cons on air suspension. And I'm like, you know what? I have given people a lot of pros and cons in comment sections and DMs, but I should definitely make a video for those who just want to straight up know some pros and cons. So here we are, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. And one other thing, you guys have helped me reach 4,000 subscribers on YouTube. Wow. I truly, truly appreciate you guys. The support you guys give to me is crazy, and it makes me so happy, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. This has been Mr. Gray 3IS, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Walking